This video was made for the grade 12 English home language students who will write the South African Independent Examinations Board assessments. Shakespeare's play The Tempest is prescribed for study in the IEB curriculum from 2021 to 2023. This video is the third in the series. You will remember that Act 1, Scene 1 opens with a ship caught in a violent storm. It ends with the stranding of the ship on an island. Standing on the island, watching the stricken ship, is Prospero and his daughter Miranda. The tumult and confusion of the shipwreck is suddenly replaced by the peaceful, ordered world of Prospero's island. It's a striking transition, and it has the effect of concentrating our attention on the rather long narrative that follows, to discover the cause of the shipwreck and its relevance to the ensuing action. On the Knowledge Organizer, we are looking at Act 1, Scene 2. We are introduced to the patriarchal society, in other words, a world run by men in which women are seen as inferior. And we are introduced to the elements of magic and the supernatural, which are key to the plot development. The four inhabitants of the island are Prospero, who was Duke of Milan, his daughter Miranda, who lives with him on the island, the only female, the spirit Ariel, whom Prospero rescued from the witch Sycorax, and Caliban, the son of the deceased Sycorax. Caliban believes that the island rightfully belongs to him. With the introduction of Caliban, we'll start our thinking about the difference between men and monsters, which in turn should start our thoughts on the issue of colonizers versus the people who are colonized. The first part of this scene is devoted to the conversation between Prospero and his daughter Miranda. Miranda asks Prospero whether he was the cause of the shipwreck. She tells her father that she felt the pain of the people on the ship. Prospero assures her that they came to no harm and that he created the storm in order to benefit her. He proceeds to tell her the story of how they came to be living on this island. As with so many Shakespearean stories, this is one of revenge. Prospero is out to take revenge on his brother Antonio, one of the passengers that we met on the ship in Scene 1. Prospero had been the Duke of Milan. The job bored him, so he spent much of his time studying and practicing magic. Antonio, his brother, was jealous of Prospero's position of authority, so had his brother and 2-year-old niece Miranda captured and set adrift on the ocean in a small boat. Naturally, Antonio hoped that Prospero and Miranda would die at sea. Luckily, Gonzalo, a loyal servant to Prospero when he was Duke of Milan, filled the boat with food and water, ensuring that father and daughter would survive. Not only did he provide them with food and water, Gonzalo also packed some of Prospero's most precious possessions, his books, his instruction manuals on how to do magic. Prospero and Miranda ended up on the island where they live now. Prospero then puts Miranda into a magical sleep to prevent her from asking more questions. There's many a parent who wishes they could do that. On the island live two other beings, both of whom are Prospero's servants. Ariel, a spirit of the air, and Caliban, who is associated with the earth. When Prospero got to the island, he found Ariel trapped in a pine tree, his punishment for refusing to do the work of the evil witch Sycorax. Prospero freed Ariel on condition that Ariel work for him. Ariel reluctantly agreed. Take note of the diction in the conversation between Prospero and Ariel. Ariel refers to Prospero as master. Sycorax was a witch from Algiers, Algeria, North Africa, banished to the island for her malicious witchcraft. She has been depicted in many unflattering ways by artists over the centuries, and almost in human form, reminiscent sometimes of the witches in Macbeth. When she was banished, she was pregnant with her son Caliban, and she is sometimes depicted as the opposite of maternal femininity, with a grotesque depiction of the female body. This should get you thinking about the way that women are portrayed in the play. I prefer to picture her looking something like this, a fiercely independent and misunderstood woman who gives birth to the doomed Caliban, a single mother in a hostile environment. You will have to make up your own minds about the way you interpret her. She's not really a character in the play. The description of her is to account for Caliban's presence on the island. There are no known references to this character anywhere else, so we can assume that she's a figment of William Shakespeare's imagination. So we've seen Ariel and we've been told why he's on the island. Now we have to be introduced to Prospero's other servant, Sycorax's son, Caliban. It's important to note that Caliban considers himself the rightful ruler of the island. After all, he was there before Prospero arrived with Miranda. Caliban is uncouth and sometimes violent. Prospero promises to educate Caliban in return for Caliban's service. In the same way that Sycorax was depicted in the most unflattering ways over the centuries, so too was Caliban. He is described as an uneducated and violent monster, an otherworldly creature very different from Prospero and the men who stagger onto the island after the shipwreck. It has been pointed out that his name is an anagram of the word cannibal. Creatures like this, half man, half beast, were part of Renaissance folklore, and Caliban is in some ways a product of this popular mythology. This interpretation of Caliban by the actor Jimon Honsu in the 2010 film version is masterful. Here we see a man just trying to make the best of the world into which he was born. The only world that Caliban has ever known is this, the enchanted island. However you picture the island, you must remember that it is a strange and wondrous place, a place of magic, literally. We call it Prospero's Island, but whose island is it really? It is possible that this line in this scene gives us something of a clue as to Shakespeare's inspiration for the shipwreck, the still vexed Bermuthas. In 1609, a ship that was en route to the New World, to Virginia in what we now call the United States of America, was stranded in the Bermudas, an area notorious for its storms and shipwrecks. Every member of the crew and every passenger made it to shore safely, and after a long spell as castaways, they did finally get to Virginia. The story of this wreck and of their experiences on the island became famous in England and was described in several pamphlets. It's virtually certain that Shakespeare would have been acquainted with this information. We can only assume what the original inhabitants of these lands thought of the new arrivals. Something similar to Caliban, I am sure. What do we know so far? That the storm was created by Ariel under Prospero's instruction in order to take revenge on his brother Antonio. Everyone who was on the ship lands safely. Well, they are shaken up, but no one has died. And they've landed on the island in separate groups, not knowing what has happened to their fellow passengers. Prospero and Caliban have an argument about who actually rules the island, an argument which Caliban loses, despite some zinger lines. In the argument, Caliban utters these lines to Miranda: "You taught me language, and my profit on it is I know how to curse." He goes on to say, "The Red Plague rid you for learning me your language." This opens up an entire argument on the role of language, particularly in the context of colonization. At the end of this argument, Prospero insults Caliban by calling him hag seed, which you'll recognize as the title of Margaret Atwood's novel, which is a modern retelling of The Tempest. As an interesting aside, did you notice that whenever Caliban speaks to Prospero, he addresses him with thee and thou, but when he speaks to Miranda, he addresses her as you? So what became of the passengers on board the stranded ship? The King of Naples and the Duke of Milan are stranded, but we are more interested in what happens to Ferdinand, the king's son. He assumes that he is the only survivor of the shipwreck. In true Shakespearean fashion, we'll soon have the young, handsome prince meeting the young and beautiful Miranda, and no prizes for guessing what happens next. Towards the end of the scene, we have now met almost all of the characters. Ariel leads Ferdinand towards Prospero and Miranda. Miranda and Ferdinand fall in love, as they do in a Shakespeare play. But Prospero is an overprotective father and does what all fathers of daughters wish they could do. He puts the young suitor under a spell that makes Ferdinand do just as he is told. It's not that Prospero doesn't approve of the union, it's that he wants to control it. As the play is now well and truly underway, the various themes are becoming more obvious. Freedom has been addressed in a number of ways, especially when you consider the physical entrapment of all of the characters on this island. Are any of these characters truly free? Betrayal is now more obvious. It's a case of keeping track of who has betrayed whom. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not that obvious at the moment. You might have an idea of who needs to forgive whom and who will need to reconcile with whom, but these themes will be developed in more detail in later scenes. The arrival of Ferdinand as a love interest for Miranda is obvious, but don't forget that there are other types of love too. That between a parent and a child, between siblings. There are many complex relationships in the play. Death is still a dominant theme, especially when we hear Ferdinand grieve the supposed death of his father, Alonso, the King of Naples. With Caliban, we can also see how identity is going to feature in this play, as he questions his role and place on the island. Numerous other themes are touched on in this scene. Nature versus nurture, especially in terms of Caliban. Authority and power. How much power does Prospero actually have? And is power the same as authority? Appearance versus reality. The island seems to be something that it is not to the stranded survivors of the shipwreck. Do you think Prospero is particularly cruel when he allows the survivors to assume that the other passengers are dead? We see Ferdinand quite distraught at the thought that he is now the new king of Naples, as would happen after the death of his father. The disorder of the shipwreck scene has been replaced with the order of Prospero's island. It will be interesting to see how long this supposed order will last. How much harmony is there on the island? Real harmony. We are starting to see layers in the relationships that point to future conflict. Of course, the relationships between the characters are very, very important, particularly those who are family members. The journeys of discovery will continue now, even though the characters are on land. It's important that you consider the various interpretations of this new world, new to all of the characters, even Caliban, as his home is irrevocably changed by these new arrivals, these colonizers. Caliban as a character is sometimes pigeonholed in the trope of noble savage, a term which can itself be considered offensive and out of place. You should spend time delving into the text of the play and drawing your own conclusions about Caliban, the way he's treated and the way that he acts and reacts. For South African students, this theme should cause much study and debate. I've already highlighted Caliban's quote in this video, that he uses the language of the colonizers to curse them. How much is Caliban's liberty woven into issues of land ownership and language? Of course, this is all part of the debate on masters and slaves, rulers and subjects. Be aware of the many motifs and symbols that continue in this scene. Prospero's mantle or cloak is a powerful symbol of his magical powers. At the beginning of the scene, he has no need of his magic powers, so he takes off the mantle. He puts it on again in line 169, so that he can put Miranda to sleep and summon Ariel. His staff, that's the long stick that he carries, is also a symbol of these magical powers. In this scene, we have had reference to every one of these motifs, except for the playing of chess. That will happen later. Take note of the music, especially the songs sung by Ariel in this scene. There are many, many important quotes in this scene. It would be impossible to mention all of them in this summary video, so I'll highlight just a few of them in the following slides. Prospero references his learning, his bookishness, which seems to have cost him his position as Duke of Milan, as he was so busy studying magic that his attention was no longer on his dukedom or his duties. Let's see you turn this quote into a Shakespeare says that too much studying is bad for you argument. Miranda's comment about the fate of the passengers aboard the stricken vessel reveals her kind and compassionate nature. She is able to empathize with the victims of the shipwreck. This is different to the way that she speaks to and about Caliban. We'll have to wait a bit to see why this is the case. The land issue is addressed by Caliban. He tells Prospero that the island has been stolen and accuses Prospero of deceitful behavior when they first met. What we have now is the prologue to the remaining action. We're all set for the rising action that will start in Act 2. The exposition is therefore complete. All of the main characters have been introduced, the relationship between the protagonist and the antagonist has been established, and the main conflict has also been introduced. We have enough information to be interested and invested in the development of the play, the rising action of the next act. You are encouraged to share this video summary lesson with all teachers and students of the play, as it's my firm belief that education and educational discourse can only flourish within a climate of generosity and allowing access to all without charge. Should you have any queries, please contact me on the email address that you see on the screen.